Well, here we are on the Sunday before the Feast of the Reformation, and we're talking about permanence and change. If there's any church, any denomination that should know about how to handle permanence and change, it should be the Lutheran Church, right? One that has kept things solid and together, but also, over time, reformed, changed, and moved. Now, about permanence. We value permanence. We want institutions that are going to survive, and we want to know that the way things are the way things are going to be. Why? Quite frankly, because it makes it easier for us to do things. If we know things are going to stay the same, we don't have to think as much. We don't have to judge each new situation. We don't have to evaluate time and time again. Quite frankly, it's just easier to make decisions the more things stay the same. And there is nothing quite so permanent as a building. Now, granted, some of our buildings do fall down over time and deteriorate and decay. But whenever we build a building, we do so hoping that it'll be a permanent sign of what is inside. Have you ever gone back to the house that you grew up in? I have a few times gone back to the house in either Welland or Fonthill. I've heard other people, though, when they go back, tell stories of how things have changed and how they've lamented what the new owners have done, as if there was some unwritten expectation that the work that the previous owners had done was somehow permanent. It is that idea of permanence that we encounter in today's reading. This from 2 Samuel 7, verses 1 and 2. Now, when the king was settled in his house, and the Lord had given him rest from all of his enemies around him, the king said to the prophet Nathan, "See now, I am living in a house of cedar, but the ark of God stays in a tent." Now, there is value in a tent. Quite frankly, the value is that it isn't permanent. And there's a problem with a tent. It isn't permanent. I guess it depends on how we view it. But certainly, no matter how we view a tent, it is not a permanent place. Does our permanence, though, apply also to God? Do we want God to be a permanent fixture? Well, I would hope that we would in our own lives and the lives of our loved ones, and also in our communities, in our country, in the world, because ultimately God is an expression of love, and we want love to be permanently placed at the forefront of all that we do and all that everyone does. But does that require God to be permanent in the way of being at a fixed place, a fixed geographical location? For many years, decades, maybe even a few centuries, the church has operated that way. Look at the sadness that we've had when we've heard of other churches closing. Look at the fear that we had when we first closed the doors at Holy Cross due to this pandemic. Look at how we even built churches, often in cases with big spires, or in the case of Holy Cross, a gigantic cross outside. So people could see that there was a permanent place for God, and they could come and worship there. Now David wants the same thing for Israel. No more moving God around in a tent. This is the time for a temple, a sanctuary, a holy of holies, a place to pilgrimage to, a permanent monument for our God. Of course, the flip side of permanence can be change, and we often lament change. However, as a friend of mine once said, it may not be change that we lament so much as it is being changed. We don't mind making changes in ourselves, but we do lament when they're forced upon us. Going back to the idea of still living in the same house that I grew up in Welland or Fonthill, I don't know of any people, actually, who have lived their entire life in one house. How many of us are even living in the same city that we were born in? How many people here? How many people in this city of Burlington grew up here? I have friends that are quite frankly around the world that I'm still in contact with on social media. If permanence is such a great thing, then you would think that we would want to live in one house and one city or town. If it was such a great thing for David to do for God, then why have we chosen a different way for ourselves? For things to be permanent for me, I would still be living at 18 Westmount Crescent, behind the Fitz Street Plaza, getting my hair cut in the barber shop that's one storefront away from the end of the plaza where the No Frills is. I'm not there. Why? Because I changed. I grew. My parents sold that house when I was 10. And over time, changes took place. Now, there are still things in me at my very core that come from my life experiences in Welland. And I hold them dear as central to who I am. But I don't wish I still lived there. In essence, I think I'm a better person because of some of the changes in my life over the years. Maybe what we're looking for isn't so much permanence, because we know that change will come. Maybe what we're looking for instead is stability. Now, our God tells David that a house and permanence isn't really what's needed. Our God says this, 2 Samuel 7, verses 6 and 7. I have not lived in a house since the day I brought up the people of Israel from Egypt to this day. But I have been moving about in a tent and a tabernacle. Wherever I have moved about among all of the people of Israel, did I ever speak a word with any of the tribal leaders of Israel, whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, saying, why have you not built me a house of cedar? What God may offer us might not be permanence. However, God might offer us stability. And particularly the stability of love. God offers love to the descendants of David, who will rule Israel. Even though God knows that the descendant will be at times immoral and unfair. Not all of David's descendants we're able to live the life that Jesus did. But the love of God will be a stabilizing factor in all of the changes that are yet to come between this moment for the nation of Israel and for the time that is still to come for all of us. I would suggest that the same stability is really what's needed in our lives and in our world. We don't need the permanence of things. We need to know that we are loved. That is what God offers to David, to David's descendants, to us. And on this, as we come close to celebrating the Reformation, on this day, that is what we give thanks for. The stability of love that comes from our God into our hearts in the midst of all of the changes of life. Amen.